Never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. Elara S. story is more than Revenge It S about rediscovering power after betrayal. She loved deeply, built loyally, and trusted completely. And when the man she sacrificed everything for abandoned her emotionally, he expected her to disappear quietly. But some women don't to break, they evolve. Instead of begging for closure, Elara rebuilt herself in silence. Every tear became strategy. Every humiliation became fuel. And now she is stepping back into the spotlight, not as a victim, but as the architect of her own comeback. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or made to feel invisible, this story will remind you exactly why your comeback can become your greatest masterpiece.
Hey, if you think real strength comes from betrayal, then like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The Boston skyline was a glittery smear on the dark harbor water, but it couldn't touch the woman moving through the lobby of the city's newest art gallery. Charlotte Vance walked like an approaching storm. Her designer gown a beautiful, sharp-angled threat in black satin. Each step was a beat in a silent countdown to the chaos she was about to create. She had curated this entire event, planning every single detail like an artist. Because tonight, at the grand opening of the Zenith Gallery, her husband Julian Thorne had no clue she was coming. He believed Charlotte was the fragile, pregnant woman he'd left crying in their fancy townhome, the brilliant wife, totally broken by how cold he'd become. But that woman was gone. Her heartbreak had been carved into a weapon of revenge. Tonight, Charlotte wasn't the victim, she was the mastermind of his total and complete downfall. The scandal she was about to expose would make Boston's elite gasp for air. Because when a woman plans her own justice, people notice, and Charlotte was here to cash in on every lie with interest. Chapter 1: The Exhibition. Boston Harbor was a dark mirror, reflecting city lights and old fortunes. From the penthouse office of her new gallery, Charlotte Vance looked out at the city she'd helped remake. The other skyscrapers seemed like tiny jewels on black silk. Each light was a story of wealth made in finance and technology. Charlotte had shown up 6 years ago as Charlotte Hayes, a fearless young curator from New York whose vision scared even the most powerful gallery owners. Her knack for creating truly immersive exhibits got the attention of Julian Thorne, the biggest tech titan on the East Coast. Julian didn't just run companies, he built empires that stretched from Miami to Montreal. Their romance blossomed between art shows and high society fundraisers. Charlotte remembered their first encounter at a modern art conference, where her bold exhibit idea had the whole room talking. He approached her after, his tailored suit fitting him perfectly. His ambitions was like gravity, and when he smiled, Charlotte felt everything else just fade away. The curator who wants to build a gallery that actually means something? He'd asked, his voice low and confident. I just had to meet the woman brave enough to challenge the old guard. Their wedding was the biggest event of the year. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts literally shut down for their wedding, flying in 1,000 guests from all over the world. Charlotte was a masterpiece walking down the aisle, her gown a wild cascade of modern lace. The museum's great hall was turned into a forest of white lilies and sculptures as a strings quartet played. Julian waited for her, his eyes wet with tears, whispering, "My beautiful curator," when she reached the altar. A Massachusetts state senator married them beneath a stunning Dale Chihuly glass sculpture. As they kissed, silent fireworks exploded over the Charles River, a brilliant salute to their new life. The first 3 years were a perfectly arranged, sun-filled fantasy. Charlotte started her own firm, Vance Curations, with an office right in the financial district. She became famous for creating major art installations that completely transformed corporate buildings. Her style mixed classic art with bold, modern artists, breathing new life into Boston's architecture. The townhome they bought was their first big project together. Charlotte designed it as a temple of polished concrete and glass. Huge windows framed the city skyline like a painting, and she personally chose every single piece of modern furniture. Julian was the perfect husband back then. He'd surprise her with rare art books he'd found on his business trips. He planned getaways to Paris and Milan, and he celebrated every one of her awards like it was his own. They even created a charity together, the Thorne Vance Foundation, to fund young artists in New England. "You're my anchor, Lottie," he would tell her as they sat on their rooftop, watching the city lights come on. "Before you, I was just a programmer. With you, we're creating a dynasty." And Charlotte believed him. She poured her heart into his world. Her incredible exhibits had turned 3 of Julian's boring office towers into cultural hotspots. His main tech headquarters had her art walks, creating amazing immersive experiences for employees, while another building featured a public sculpture garden that changed the whole downtown vibe. Every project proved her genius and her love for him. But betrayal often hides in plain sight, pretending to be ambition. The first signs were tiny cracks. Julian started working late, saying it was server deals with Seoul. Their quiet dinners were replaced by emergency calls from his tech team. Weekend trips got canceled last minute because of server failures or hostile takeover threats. Charlotte, who was focused on her biggest project ever, the Zenith Gallery, didn't see the cracks forming in her own life at first. She trusted Julian completely, thinking their marriage was rock solid. It was 6 months ago, while she was planning a surprise anniversary trip for him, that Charlotte found out her perfect life was a lie. The trip was her secret, a week at a private villa in Tuscany. Charlotte was on their shared iPad, looking for the booking information, when a receipt from a jewelry store caught her eye. It was a small monthly payment she didn't recognize. Puzzled, she looked up the jeweler. They created discreet, custom pieces for the very wealthy. Her blood ran cold. She picked up her phone and hired a private investigator, telling him to look into her husband. 2 weeks later, an email arrived. The subject line was clean, professional, and terrifying. It just said, "Your report." Charlotte felt all the air get sucked out of the room as she opened the file. It was Julian, but he wasn't by himself. A much younger woman with platinum blonde hair was with him in photos taken all over his Miami penthouse, a trip he swore was a solo tech conference just 1 month before. This woman was clearly not his coworker. They were kissing on the balcony, her hand resting over his heart. They were drinking champagne by the pool at sunset. The world around Charlotte went completely silent. The city noise vanished. The glow from her screen felt like an attack. She was scrolling through a slideshow of her own personal ruin. The woman, whose name was Maya, whispered something to him in one picture, and Julian leaned back and laughed. A real, happy laugh that Charlotte thought he only ever shared with her. Then, in the last photo, the woman held up her hand, showing off a very specific Cartier bracelet. A bracelet Charlotte had seen the designs for, one Julian said he was having made for his own sister. Charlotte snapped the iPad shut. The sharp noise echoed in the quiet house like a gunshot. She didn't shed a tear. She just sat there, perfectly still, as her life shattered. When Julian got home that night, she smiled and said everything was wonderful, but her mind was already designing a war. That night, lying next to him in the dark, she listened to his calm, even breathing and started planning a demolition. A curator knows that before you can show something new and amazing, you have to tear down the rotten, broken exhibit first. The affair was real. But what was she going to do about it? A. Expose him publicly. For 3 painful months, I led 2 different lives. To everyone else, I was Charlotte, the art world's golden girl, the glowing, pregnant wife and business partner. But on the inside, I was just a woman quietly taking notes on the complete destruction of my own life. Our mornings turned into a carefully scripted performance. Julian would get up before sunrise to check Asian markets while I looked over gallery acquisition reports. We would kiss goodbye, and his lips always felt like a lie, but I was finished with suspicion. I had proof. It wasn't about his phone or some new cologne he was wearing. It was the massive holes in his alibis. The board meeting in Chicago when his credit card bill showed a hotel suite in Miami. I collected these facts like an expert checking a painting for a fake. Her name was Maya, and I learned that in the coldest way possible. I hired a private detective after I found a receipt for a $20,000 necklace that I never received. The investigator, a quiet man named Marcus, met me at a sleek coffee shop downtown. He looked at me with a kind of detached pity I wouldn't understand for about another 30 seconds. "Mrs. Vance," he started, keeping his voice down. "Mr. Thorne is discreet." I managed a tight, fragile smile. "I know. That's why I hired you. What do you have?" The man let out a sigh. "Charlotte, are you sure you want to see this now?" But my hand was already moving for the manila envelope, perfectly steady as I pulled it across the cold stone table. A table I'd picked because it had a perfect view of my new gallery. There he was, Liam, in a high-res photo on a tech blog. He wasn't alone, and they definitely weren't talking about quarterly earnings, Isabel's. The caption called her a visionary investor. She was laughing, head thrown back, as Liam stared at her with an intensity I thought was reserved for me. My world didn't shatter. It snapped into sharp, brutal focus. My phone buzzed a calendar alert. Anniversary dinner, 8 p.m. The cruel timing of it all. The photo captured their perfect, treacherous moment. Liam. The name felt like ash in my mouth. It was a networking event. That's what he'd claimed. But I recognized that dismissive tone. It's the one husbands use right before they say, "You're overreacting." A lie wrapped in corporate jargon. But I already knew. I'd spent the night digging. Isabel was 28, a venture capital wonderkind who'd taken Silicon Valley by storm. She'd led the last funding round for my husband's SAI startup. She was brilliant, of course, with the casual confidence of someone used to running the world. She had a gaze that assessed your value and a smile that could liquidate assets. "Isabel, I think it's time to go," Liam said, his voice tight as he adjusted his collar. "We'll circle back on this." She gathered her tablet with a deliberate, unhurried grace, completely in control. As she passed me, she paused, her eyes meeting mine. There was no flicker of guilt, not even discomfort, just a sliver of something that looked like pity. "Clara," she said, her voice smooth as polished chrome, "I truly am sorry it had to happen this way." Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of a very expensive perfume and the terrifying knowledge that she now owned a piece of my husband's future. Liam took a step closer, holding his hands up like I was a cornered animal. "Clara, listen, we need to talk. This isn't some big deal." "It was just what, Liam?" My voice was eerily steady, like it was coming from someone else. "A stress reliever? A side project? A break from your architect wife who is just too boring?" He opened his mouth to reply, then closed it. In that silence, I saw the calculation in his eyes as he crafted his next lie. "It's complicated. The pressure from the launch has been relentless, so you're always so wrapped up in your blueprints." And there it was, the affair, followed by the sharp, twisting blade of blame. It was my fault. My work, my passion for creating beautiful spaces, had somehow made me the problem in my own marriage. I bent down to retrieve my portfolio, carefully stepping around the invisible wreckage on the floor. When I looked back at Liam, my expression was hard. I wasn't the woman who used to tiptoe around his moods anymore. He had just created someone new. "When you get home tonight," I said, my voice completely void of emotion, "my things won't be there. Clara, wait, don't do this. We can fix this. I'll end it. We can go to counseling. We can. But I was already walking toward the door, leaving him with his empty promises and the faint smell of his investor's perfume. That night, I didn't go back to our penthouse overlooking the bay. I drove to a boutique hotel in Sausalito whose lobby I had designed years ago. Back when I still believed in things like forever, I started making calls. First, to my lawyer. Then, a forensic accountant. And finally, my brother in New York, who unleashed a string of curses for solid minutes after I explained what had happened. The next few days revealed the affair was just the first crack in a much larger collapse. My lawyer, David Chen, a man known for handling Silicon Valley's messiest divorces, called me into his office. He laid a series of documents on his conference table that made the air leave my lungs. Clara, he started, tapping a thick stack of bank statements. We've got a serious problem. For years, I kept my architecture firm's sciences separate, but shared joint accounts with Liam for our home and investments. Or so I thought. Liam has been moving large sums from your joint accounts into a series of shell corporations, David explained. You never authorized these transfers, did you? I could only shake my head, feeling sick. According to these records, over the past 2 years, he has diverted more than $5 million. And it gets worse. David slid another binder across the table. It was filled with loan agreements I'd never seen, investment documents bearing my forged signature, and deeds to properties I didn't know we owned. It looks like your husband was using your firm's spotless reputation to secure millions in high-risk loans. And Clara, most of these ventures have already failed. The room began to tilt. I gripped the chair as David outlined the true scope of Liam's financial betrayal. How much? I whispered. How much debt am I in? If these forgeries hold up in court, you are personally on the hook for almost $10 million in liabilities you knew nothing about. $10 million. My personal savings were maybe $1 million. My firm, my equity in a few projects might be worth $3 million if I sold off everything. Liam hadn't just cheated on me. He had systematically dismantled my financial security. He used my name, my reputation, and my signature as his weapons. What are my options? I asked, the words catching in my throat. Fight. We allege fraud, forgery, and we go after him with everything we have. David removed his glasses, his stern expression softening for just a second. But Clara, Liam is a Silicon Valley darling with the most aggressive lawyers in California. He has the capital to drag this out until you're broke. That night, in my hotel room, I poured a glass of wine and watched the fog roll over the Golden Gate Bridge. The city where I'd built my career now felt like it was mocking me. My phone buzzed. Liam. He'd been calling non-stop. This time, I picked up. Clara, thank God. We have to talk. Please, just come back to the city. I don't have a home in the city anymore, Liam, I said, my voice thin and even. You used it as collateral without telling me. A beat of silence. Then Liam's tone shifted, becoming hard, efficient. Clara, I know you're angry, but let's not make this any uglier than it has to be. We can handle this. Handle what? The affair? The $10 million in secret debt? The forged legal documents? Listen. Snaps, his voice now the one he used to crush competitors in boardrooms. You have a choice. We settle this quietly. You take what's left and we move on. Or you fight me. And I promise you, Clara, you will walk away with absolutely nothing. That's not a threat. It's a market reality. You don't understand how this town works. You don't have my money, my board, or my connections. If you challenge me, I will destroy your career. I will make sure your firm is blacklisted from every project in the Bay Area. Your name will be toxic. You won't be able to design a garage. I shut my eyes tight. From a nearby event space, I could hear the faint sound of music and laughter, a cruel soundtrack to my life imploding. Oh, and one last thing, Liam added. Isabel's pregnant. The words were a physical blow. I doubled over, the phone falling from my hand as the tears I had refused to cry finally came in a gut-wrenching sob. Liam S.'s voice kept talking, a tiny metallic sound from the phone on the carpet. We're getting married as soon as this is finalized. Honestly, it's for the best. Clara, we've been drifting for years. We just didn't want to admit it. Isabel, she challenges me. She makes me feel alive again. I grabbed the phone, my entire body trembling with rage. Clara, you still there? Yes, I whispered, my voice broken. Good. Let's be smart about this. I wiped my tears, stood up tall, and stared at my own reflection in the dark window. Liam, I said, my voice suddenly like ice. Go to hell. And I ended the call. If you want to see Clara rebuild her life from the ruins of this betrayal, make sure you subscribe. Her battle for her future starts now. Chapter 2. The Downward Spiral. The next few months were the hardest of Clara's 36 years. She rented a tiny studio in the Mission District, a place that cost less than their old monthly landscaping bill, but it was all she could manage with her assets tied up in court. The apartment was one room, a kitchenette barely big enough for a coffee maker, and a view of Boise intersection. No bay views, no concierge, no designer furniture, but it had something the penthouse never offered. It was hers alone. With cheap coffee and wading through piles of legal documents from David. Her afternoons were a demoralizing cycle of calls, from clients pausing projects, developers ghosting her, and creditors demanding payments she couldn't afford. At night, the city's glare and endless traffic noise seeped through her blinds. Clara hadn't just lost a husband. Her entire professional life was collapsing. Whispers about her financial ruin moved quickly through the tight-knit architecture community. In a world built on reputation, a bad rumor is a career killer. The sustainable community center she was designing for the cities, her passion project, was shelved indefinitely after major donors backed out. Bit by bit, 5 years of our shared ambition were being completely erased. But the nights were always the worst. Alone in our cavernous apartment, with only the hum of the city for company, Charlotte was ambushed by memories she'd spent all day fighting. The image from the art gallery's website played on a loop in her head. The way Marcus had lied about the credit card charge, the way Isabella had been draped on his arm. A trip he called a conference in Aspen. They had become a real couple, not just some sordid secret. How long had this been their reality? They were probably laughing at her while she was busy building their future. They'd mocked her devotion while she drafted their future, and they drafted their affair. The questions were toxic, poisoning her confidence. Charlotte stared at her own pale face in the mirror, trying to see what Marcus saw in Isabella that he'd lost in her. Was it her age? Charlotte was 35. Isabella was a 20-something intern. Was it because Charlotte was his partner, a woman with her own vision? Isabella was a blank page. Or maybe, the cruelest thought of all, Marcus was right. Maybe she became so focused on their empire, she forgot how to be the wife he wanted. Was this somehow her fault? That's the kind of thought that breaks you in the middle of the night, the whispers that you are the architect of your own pain. Charlotte had started drinking wine, not for pleasure, but like a prescription. 1 glass became 2, then a bottle just to face the divorce settlement papers that felt like a death certificate. She stopped wearing her makeup, her custom suits, the very uniform of her success. Now she just wore an old college hoodie, looking less like the architectural powerhouse she was and more like a ghost haunting a life she used to own. Her sister Olivia called every night from Boston, her voice a mix of rage at Marcus and deep concern for Charlotte. "Please, just come home," Olivia begged. "We can sort this out. You can restart here." But going home felt like admitting defeat. Charlotte came to Chicago to build monuments. Going back meant admitting the woman who helped shape the sky was now returning completely broken. Charlotte stopped. If you know what it's like to have your world completely fall apart, let me know in the comments. We can get through this together. Her wake-up call didn't come in person, but with the cold, digital finality of an email. She was scrolling through her inbox when she saw it. A registry confirmation from a baby boutique. Her hands shook as she clicked the link. And there it was, a public wish list for Marcus and Isabella's baby girl. The due date, the expensive imported crib, the designer clothes, and Marcus, smiling in the photo with his hand on Isabella's pregnant stomach. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat, her screen blurring through tears. She scrolled past the long list of lavish gifts, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw a section for messages from friends. A name made her blood run cold. David and Sarah. They had bought the most expensive bassinet on the list. David, Nick, and Sarah. Marcus's best man and her maid of honor. The couple who spent every holiday in their home. The people Charlotte considered family. But here they were, celebrating Marcus's new life as if Charlotte never even existed. She clicked on Sarah's public comment. "I am so beyond excited to be the godmother," it read. Godmother. The word hit Charlotte like a physical blow. Sarah, who had sobbed through her wedding vows, was going to be godmother to the child of her husband's affair. "We couldn't be happier," Marcus had replied below. "It's incredible how things turn out. I never thought I could be this whole again, as if their marriage was something he had to recover from." Poor Charlotte. Someone else wrote, "I hope she's doing okay." "Let's not dwell on the past," Marcus replied. "This baby is our future." Charlotte dropped her tablet, the screen cracking on the marble floor. She slid down the wall, silent tears cutting paths through the dust on her cheeks. She thought the affair was rock bottom. She thought losing the firm was the worst part. But this was a completely new level of hell. This was the realization she wasn't just being replaced. She was being publicly deleted. Like their entire decade together was nothing more than a bad draft. She finally forced herself up, picked up the cracked tablet, and stared at her fractured reflection. That night, with a glass of cheap grocery store wine, Charlotte knew she had to make a call. She dialed her sister. "Olivia," she said, her voice trembling. "Char, honey, what's happened?" "I saw it, the registry, the baby girl." A thick silence filled the line. Olivia knew. "So, how are you doing?" Charlotte considered the question. Shattered? Yes. Humiliated? Completely. But deep beneath the pain, a small, hard flame had just ignited. "Angry," she said finally. "I am so incredibly angry." "Good," Olivia said, her voice like flint. "It's about damn time." "Olivia, I need you." "Here. In Chicago." "When?" "Now." "Get on the next flight out." "Why? What are we going to do?" Charlotte walked to the window, staring at the glittering towers she had helped bring to life. "We are going to dismantle his entire world, piece by piece," Charlotte said, a cold resolve flooding her veins. "We're taking back every single thing he took from me, and he will never forget my name." Olivia let out a sharp, ferocious laugh. Their grandmother had organized factory strikes. Their mother built a restaurant empire from a single food truck. The women in their family didn't just endure, they fought back. "Now that sounds like my sister," Olivia said. "What's the plan?" A slow, dangerous smile spread across Charlotte's face for the first time in months. "Bring your laptop, your burner phones, and prepare for war." 3 days later, Olivia arrived, looking every bit the General Charlotte needed. She had one suitcase, a briefcase with $50,000 in cash, and a strategy she'd already mapped out on the plane. "Okay, first things first," Olivia said, setting up her laptop on the vast kitchen island. "We need intelligence, everything. On Marcus, on Isabella, on his shell companies, the real financial records, not the sanitized ones he shows his investors. And how are we going to get that?" Olivia's grin was sharp, reflecting Charlotte's newfound purpose. I know a guy, a forensic accountant. He's a digital ghost who specializes in complex corporate fraud and hidden assets. And he owes me a very big favor. Less than a week later, an encrypted file arrived. It contained terabytes of data. It was all there. Hidden offshore accounts, property deeds in the Caymans, proof the affair started years ago. And then they found it, the real weapon. Concrete evidence that Marcus has been forging Charlotte's digital signature on loan applications for the last 2 years. Char, Olivia whispered, pointing at the screen. This is wire fraud. It's enough to send him to federal prison for 20 years. I don't want him in prison, Charlotte said, a strange gleam in her eyes. I want something so much worse. I want poetic justice. If you think Charlotte is about to take back control, hit that like button, because this story of revenge is only just getting started. 2 weeks later, Charlotte walked into her lawyer's office, completely transformed. Her hair was sharp, her makeup was perfect, and she wore a dress that was pure power. Mr. Davies, she said, placing a small flash drive on his desk, I'm withdrawing the divorce papers. Mr. Davies stared, utterly stunned. Charlotte, what are you talking about? This drive will ruin him in court. We can get every penny back, and then some. Exactly, Charlotte replied with an ice-cold smile. But this isn't going to play out in court. We're going to do this my way. The new Charlotte Vance had arrived. 6 months after her world imploded, she was ready to re-enter Chicago's elite circles. But this time, she wouldn't be the victim. The first step was a new command center. Olivia called in a favor and secured a raw industrial loft in the West Loop. This wasn't the cold glass box she'd shared with Marcus. This was a war room, the perfect stage for a comeback where the wronged wife becomes the victor. The loft was a converted factory with soaring ceilings and massive windows framing the skyline. Charlotte made the open space her home, her office, and her base of operations. Olivia filled it with furniture that was sleek, modern, and screamed quiet, deadly confidence. But the apartment wasn't the only upgrade. Charlotte built a team, a trainer, a nutritionist, a new stylist. The goal wasn't just to look good. This was about forging an armor of unshakable confidence, the kind you only earn by walking through hell and coming out the other side. Her hair was now cut in a severe angled bob that highlighted her cheekbones. Her new clothes were minimalist, elegant, and projected a level of success that required no explanation. But the most important change was internal. Charlotte spent months studying Marcus' entire empire. She learned every partner, every investor, every politician in his pocket. She went deep into his financials, his weak points, and his ugliest secrets. Like a general planning an invasion, she mapped out his entire world, and in doing so, she found the one hairline crack that could bring it all down. It turns out Marcus wasn't the architectural genius everyone thought. His whole firm was a house of cards built on a mountain of hidden debt and shady loans between shell companies. It only looked good because he kept acquiring new projects. I discovered his entire operation depended on landing one single contract to stay afloat. That contract was for a new $2 billion waterfront development the city was accepting bids for. It was the biggest project in Chicago, and Marcus had to win it. And I had the perfect weapon to dismantle his entire world. For 4 years, I'd poured my life into Project Elysian, a radical new design for a private eco-resort that fused opulence with true sustainability. A vision that would forever change the Porto Vella skyline. I'd hidden it from Julian, wanting to surprise him with the finished concept. The irony was suffocating. The very project meant to build our future was now the key to his destruction. In 2 months, I polished my pitch, cashed in every favor, and built a new architecture firm from scratch. My old life had been erased. In its place was Monroe Design Collective, with my old mentor Lena as my partner and a team of brilliant young architects. That name was a vow. I was coming back from the ashes to build my own legacy. My return was set for the annual Porto Vela Real Estate Summit at the Grand Vela Ballroom, the same venue where my life imploded 6 months earlier. It was the perfect stage, packed with every major player in the industry, to declare that I was back in the game. I walked in at 8 p.m. sharp, late enough to be noticed, but not so late I seemed desperate. I was wearing a jaw-dropping scarlet gown I designed myself that shimmered like liquid fire under the chandeliers. The reaction was immediate. A wave of silence followed me as I moved through the room, greeting old colleagues like I was just back from a long holiday. Everyone who remembered me as Julian Vance's quiet, supportive wife saw the truth in an instant. This wasn't some broken woman. This was a woman who'd discovered her own power. I had rediscovered myself. "Ava Monroe," said Councilman Davies, the head of the city's Plans Commission, doing a literal double take. "I'm shocked to see you. I heard you'd gone back to New York. Leave Porto Vela?" My smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Darling, this is my town. I'd never abandon it. Not when things are about to get so interesting." I didn't even have to say Julian's name. His betrayal was thick in the air. At 8:45, right on schedule, Julian walked in with Isabella. Of course. She was now 7 months pregnant, clutching his arm like a trophy he'd just acquired. I watched them from across the crowded ballroom. For a split second, I felt that old familiar sting. Then I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and felt an ice-cold sense of purpose take over. It was showtime. Julian finally spotted me about 10 minutes later, holding court with investors and laughing with Arthur Finch, the city's most feared architectural critic. When Julian's eyes finally met mine, I held his gaze across the sea of people and offered him a slow, deliberate smile, the kind a predator gives its prey, not a shattered wife. It was a smile that said we were now competitors and that I was completely over him. Julian froze, his champagne flute paused halfway to his lips. I saw the shock on his face, the utter confusion, and then that first delicious spark of fear. This wasn't the woman he had destroyed. This was someone else entirely. I excused myself and began walking toward the balcony, my route taking me right past Julian and Isabella. Just as I was about to pass, I stopped, feigning surprise as if I'd only just seen them. "Julian," I said, my voice dripping with honey. "Isabella, what a lovely surprise." Isabella physically recoiled, her hand instinctively going to her pregnant stomach. Julian's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Ava, I didn't expect to see you here." "Really? Why?" I cocked my head, my face a mask of pure innocence. This summit has always been crucial for my career. Speaking of which, Isabella, congratulations on the baby. You look absolutely glowing. The move was flawless. Congratulating her so gracefully neutralized the drama and established me as the woman who'd already won. Isabella just managed a quiet, strained thank you. "Well," I said, my tone light and breezy, "I won't hold you two up. Julian, I trust you're doing well. I hope you're both very, very happy." With that, I glided past them, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and the distinct feeling that the balance of power had just permanently shifted. I didn't engage them again, but I felt Julian's gaze on me the rest of the night. He was scared, he was confused, and that was exactly where I wanted him. Chapter 6. The Blueprint. 2 weeks later, it was time for Phase 2. The deadline for the Sterling Key development bid was just 6 weeks away. I knew Julian had funneled every dollar his firm had into his proposal. I also knew, thanks to an excellent private detective, that this single project was the only thing propping up his entire company. I secured a meeting with Eleanor Sterling, the matriarch of the family trust financing the development, and the one person whose opinion actually mattered. Eleanor had loved my early work and had always shown me respect, even through the messy divorce. "Eleanor," I began, in her stunning Bayside office, "I have a proposal that will redefine this city's future." For the next hour, I presented my complete vision for Project Elysian. It wasn't just another set of luxury condos. It was a fully self-sustaining community, blending breathtaking design with next-generation green technology. Bioluminescent pathways, living seawalls to restore the coastline, and a zero-waste infrastructure that would become the new global benchmark. "It's ambitious," Eleanor said, after I concluded my pitch. "Wildly ambitious. Do you have the capital to actually execute this?" "I have something more valuable than capital, Eleanor. I have conviction, and a team that believes in this idea. This isn't just another job for me. This is my legacy for Portuvela, the city that gave me so much and taught me that you have to burn things down to build something new." Eleanor leaned in, her eyes sharp with genuine excitement. "Ava, this could completely change coastal development, but the cost will be astronomical." "I've been preparing this for 4 years," I answered without missing a beat. "I have sovereign wealth partners from the Middle East, tech innovators from Seattle, and exclusive contracts for materials no other developer in the state can access. I can deliver this, Eleanor, and I can do it in a way that makes this project legendary for more than just the views." When I left Sterling Tower that afternoon, I felt something that had been missing for months: genuine hope. Not the desperate hope of a survivor, but the fierce hope of a creator who had rediscovered her calling. The true test, however, arrived a week later. I was in my office finalizing the bid when my phone rang. The name on the screen made me smile. Julian. I'd been expecting his call. "Hello, Julian." My voice was as cool and calm as it was at the summit. "Ava, we have to talk." "Oh, about what?" An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I could practically hear his teeth grinding. "You know about what. I heard you submitted a proposal for the Sterling Key project. And Ava," Julian's voice shifted to that low, coercive tone he always used to get what he wanted. "Darling, I know you're hurting. I know I destroyed everything, but this is just petty revenge. That development, I've poured 2 years of my life into it. My entire company is riding on this one deal." A beautiful, ice-cold clarity settled over me. This was the moment I had been planning for. "Are you asking me to pull my bid?" I asked, my voice a model of professional curiosity. "I'm asking you to be sensible. I can fix this. I'll throw other projects your way. I'll make sure you're taken care of. We could even be partners on it." I laughed, a short, sharp sound with no warmth in it. "Julian, you know what the real difference is between us? You build things to possess them. I build things because they deserve to exist. And Portovella deserves a landmark built from vision, not from simple greed." "Ava, please. Good luck on your proposal, Julian. May the best design win." And I ended the call. Chapter 7. The groundbreaking. The main hall of the Portovella Art Museum had never been the setting for such a stunning comeback. The same woman who, 6 months prior, had fled the city in utter disgrace now stood at the podium like a monarch reclaiming her throne. It was the night of the annual City Founders Ball, the biggest event on the social calendar. And Ava Monroe had arrived not as the scorned wife of Julian Vance, but as the lauded CEO of Monroe Design Collective. 3 days earlier, the Sterling Trust had announced my firm had won the Sterling Key contract. Losing that massive contract didn't just hurt Julian's reputation, it exposed the deep financial rot within his company. The internal audit that followed the announcement revealed the staggering scope of his lies. The leaked texts confirming his affair had been just the tip of the iceberg. For years, Julian had been cooking the books and misleading his lenders. Without the Sterling Key deal, which had been the basis for all his recent financing, His entire development empire was about to come crashing down. Federal investigators were already raiding Julian Vance's downtown offices this morning. He was facing serious charges of wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy. His lines of credit were frozen, his personal assets seized, and his golden boy image was utterly destroyed. But Ava hadn't come to the founders' ball to gloat about her ex-husband's downfall. She came to prove that a woman could walk out of a disaster and build something stronger, more beautiful, and more powerful than ever before. Her suit, a crisp white custom design, was a monument to her unapologetic success. The fabric seemed to absorb the stage lights, casting a soft, powerful glow as Amelia moved. Her hair was styled in a chic bob, showing off a pair of pearl earrings, a family heirloom that shimmered with quiet fire. But her most striking feature was the solid calm she now wore like armor. For months, Amelia had carefully rebuilt her life, not just her career in biotech, but her very spirit. She fought her way back, embraced her own relentless drive, and learned to define herself not as Marcus' wife, but as Dr. Amelia Hayes. That voice made her turn. It was Ben Carter, Seattle's most influential biotech investor, walking toward her with a look of genuine respect. Ben. Amelia offered a hand, and he shook it firmly. "It's a real honor to meet you." "The honor's all mine, Amelia. Your keynote on the ethics of gene editing was revolutionary. In my 15 years in this field, I've never heard anyone lay out the future with such clarity." "Thank you," Amelia said, feeling that old spark of passion ignite inside her. "This is more than a concept to me. It's the new frontier of medicine, a future where our technology serves humanity, not just the bottom line." For the rest of the evening, Amelia was the center of the room's universe. Startup founders, pharmaceutical CEOs, and rival research scientists all vied for a moment with her. They were eager to praise her insights, inquire about her new consultancy, and suggest future partnerships. It felt like the entire industry finally saw the brilliant strategist who had been there all along, eclipsed by her marriage to Marcus. "Amelia, I've followed your papers for years," said a renowned geneticist, approaching her. "I always knew you were the real visionary. This new firm of yours is going to change everything." "This is just the beginning," Amelia promised, a confident smile playing on her lips, hinting at the vast potential yet to be unlocked. "I'm launching a new line of predictive diagnostics over the next 2 years. We're going to prove that biotech can have a conscience." And that's when she saw them walk in. Marcus and Chloe entered the conference like specters from a bad dream. Marcus wore his usual designer sweater, but it seemed to hang on him as if the scandal had physically hollowed him out. His eyes were dark, and his signature charismatic grin was a tight, desperate forgery. Chloe, now heavily pregnant, clung to Marcus' arm like a life raft. Her designer maternity dress couldn't conceal the pure panic on her face. News of his startup's spectacular failure was the talk of the town, and the weight of it was clearly crushing them both. A strange, sudden peace washed over Amelia. For months, she had imagined this very encounter 1,000 different ways. But standing here, she felt none of the triumphant satisfaction she'd anticipated. There was no joy in seeing Marcus look so broken, no victory in the fear she saw in Chloe's eyes. Instead, what she felt was a powerful, liberating sense of indifference. Marcus saw her. Across the crowded ballroom, their eyes met, and she read a whole novel in his expression. Regret, desperation, and a trace of something she hadn't seen in years. He started moving toward her. Amelia politely excused herself and walked toward the tall windows overlooking Puget Sound. She wasn't running from him, but she wasn't engaging either. She was simply claiming her space, radiating a quiet and unshakable strength. "Amelia." Marcus's voice was hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in days. Amelia turned to face him, her expression a polite, neutral mask she had perfected over the past year. Marcus, she acknowledged simply. He just stood there, completely lost, searching for the right words. The low buzz of the conference filled the air between them, and the Seattle skyline sparkling across the water was a beautiful backdrop for the ugly tension of the moment. "You look," Marcus stopped, cleared his throat, and tried again. "You look amazing. Different. More like the person I remember than I've seen in a decade." Amelia tilted her head, observing him with the cool, detached curiosity of a scientist studying a failed experiment. "And who is that, Marcus?" "Brilliant," he admitted, his voice a raw whisper against the crowd. "Uncompromising, like the woman I fell in love with before everything went so wrong." A small, cold smile touched Amelia's lips. It was a smile of pure, hard-won validation. "It's strange," Amelia said, her voice soft but sharp as a scalpel. "It took you cheating on me, falsifying trial data, and becoming a disgrace to this industry for me to finally see who I am when I'm not fixing your disasters." Marcus flinched as if her words were physical strikes. "Amelia, I know I messed up. It was unforgivable. I was so arrogant. I was a coward. I tore down the only good thing I ever had." "Yes," Amelia agreed, with a chilling sense of calm. "You did." The silence that fell between them felt absolute, while other guests laughed and networked just feet away, oblivious to the private demolition taking place. "Is there any way?" Marcus began, but Amelia raised a hand, cutting him off instantly. "No," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You don't even know what I was going to say." Amelia smiled, and this time it was genuine, filled with a kind of pity that was far more crushing than rage. "You were going to ask if there was a chance for us, a way to start over, a way to undo the damage you caused." Marcus could only nod, his face a picture of utter despair. "And the answer is no," Amelia went on. "Not because I despise you, Marcus, and not because I want you to fail. It's because the woman you destroyed is gone. She vanished the night I saw those damning texts on your watch. And the woman standing here today deserves a hell of a lot more than the excuses of a man who only appreciates what he has when he's already lost it for good." Just then, as if summoned, Ben Carter appeared at her side. "Amelia," Ben said, his gaze passing over Marcus as if he were invisible. "The panel on bioethics is starting. Shall we go find our seats?" Amelia gave Ben a warm, authentic smile. "I would love that." She took Ben's arm and let him guide her away from Marcus without a single backward glance, heading toward the front row as the stage lights began to dim. The contrast was almost beautiful. Amelia was walking with a man who championed her work, who believed in her vision, who saw her as an equal, while Marcus was left standing alone, watching her leave. Over her shoulder, Amelia could see Marcus, a statue in the middle of the flowing crowd, an island of regret in a sea of progress. Chloe had reached him, her face tight with anxiety, but he didn't seem to notice her at all. His gaze was locked on Amelia, following her with the haunted look of a man who was just now understanding the true cost of his betrayal. "Are you okay?" Ben asked quietly, as they settled into their seats. "I'm perfect," Amelia replied, and was shocked at how true it felt. "For the first time in a very long time, I am right where I am meant to be." The moderator on stage tapped the mic, and a hush settled over the auditorium. And that was when the entire evening fractured into a million pieces. From across the hall, Amelia heard a sharp, panicked cry. She turned just in time to see Chloe doubled over, one hand grabbing her stomach, the other desperately clutching Marcus's arm to keep from falling. A dark patch was spreading on the pale carpet beneath her. "Help me!" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with a raw, primal fear. "Somebody please help her! The baby's coming!" The professional conference instantly devolved into chaos. People surged forward, some trying to help, others just staring at the public implosion. Someone shouted to call 911. The moderator went silent, leaving a ringing vacuum filled only by frantic and Chloe's pained sobs. Amelia sat frozen in her chair, watching the whole disaster unfold like a slow-motion train wreck. The man who wrecked her life, now terrified, holding the woman who helped him do it. I watched the two of them face a crisis that stripped them bare, and I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction in their fear, no desire to help, no craving for revenge. Just a deep, profound stillness. The peace that comes when you've finally closed a chapter for good. My colleague Ben looked over at me, his face full of concern. Should we do something? I watched as event staff rushed in, as Marcus shouted frantic, useless denials, as Chloe was gently helped from the auditorium. I saw the pure animal terror in their eyes. I saw the toxic bond they shared in that moment of failure, and how they clung to each other as their world collapsed. No, I said finally. They have each other, and that's all they're getting. Just before he disappeared through the doors, Marcus looked back one last time, his eyes searching for me. We locked gazes across the chaotic ballroom, and in his look I saw a silent question. A final, desperate plea for something I no longer had to give. I gave him a small, deliberate nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a final closing statement. An acknowledgement that we once had something real. An acknowledgement that our partnership mattered, even though he was the one who burned it to the ground. An acknowledgement that it was over, and we both had to move on. And then he was gone, and I was on the biggest stage in Seattle, in front of my entire industry, with my future stretched out before me like an empty page, waiting for me to write the next chapter. Well, Ben said, after a long silence, I actually laughed a real deep laugh that felt like a release. You know what, sir? I'm done talking about personal drama. I've had enough of it to last a lifetime. Let's talk about something that actually matters, like creating affordable, sustainable housing in this city. The moderator's face relaxed into a genuine smile. Now that is a topic worth discussing, and as the panel tried to get back on schedule, I, Clara Evans, spoke with a renewed fire in my eyes, outlining my vision for a new kind of architecture. I described communities that could heal lives, a future that could redefine what a city could be for its people, of a startup that chose people over paychecks. I was talking about my future, the epilogue. My story didn't end that day at the tech conference. It really began 6 months later, standing in the sterile clean room of my own research lab, watching my team prep for the first human trials. The project I'd once dreamt of building with my husband was now my sanctuary. It was real, tangible proof that a woman could build her own empire on a foundation of unbreakable science. Any woman who survives that level of betrayal knows this in her bones. You don't get over an affair by going back to the man who broke you. You heal by finally realizing you are smarter, stronger, and more valuable than you ever let yourself believe when you were shrinking to fit inside his world. A world that was never big enough for your ambition anyway. I never saw Marcus again. I heard the gossip. Of course, Seattle's tech scene is a very small town. He was under investigation for securities fraud, that Chloe had vanished back to Europe with all their investment capital. He lost it all. The company, the high-rise condo, the respect. And I just felt a quiet sense of thanks for him, the way you do for all the closed doors in your life. Gratitude? Because his greed set me free from a life that was always too small for me. Gratitude, because his lies taught me that I could survive any storm that rolled in. And gratitude, because by breaking my heart, he forced me to find a strength that had nothing to do with his approval. For any woman listening, your story isn't over just because he closed the book on you. It starts the second you decide to write a final chapter that is all yours. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about women who built kingdoms from the ruins, who spun betrayal into breakthroughs, and who showed that sometimes losing everything is the only way to win the life you were meant to live. In Seattle, A city that knows a thing or two about reinvention, Ava Sharma proved the best startup a woman can ever launch is herself.